Captain Maya Rodriguez had always dreamed of flying fighter jets, but the military had other plans for her. After graduating top of her class from the Air Force Academy, she was assigned to cargo transport instead of the F-18 squadron she desperately wanted. The decision came from Colonel Bradley Harrison, a man who believed women had no place in combat aviation. Maya watched her male classmates with lower scores get assigned to fighter jets, while she was relegated to hauling supplies across the Pacific. The injustice burned in her chest every time she climbed into her C-130 transport plane. She knew she was being held back not because of her abilities, but because of her gender. Years passed, and Maya became one of the most skilled transport pilots in the Air Force. She flew dangerous missions into war zones, navigated through hostile territory, and saved countless lives by delivering critical supplies. But recognition never came. Colonel Harrison made sure of that. He blocked her transfer requests, gave her poor evaluations despite her flawless record, and openly mocked her ambitions in front of other officers. Maya's frustration grew with each passing day. She had proven herself time and again, yet the system seemed designed to keep her grounded in transport duty. Her fellow pilots respected her skills, but the old guard leadership refused to acknowledge her potential. The breaking point came during a routine mission briefing. Colonel Harrison announced that the squadron would be getting new F-18 pilots, all of them men with less experience than Maya. When she raised her hand to volunteer, Harrison laughed and said women were too emotional to handle high-stress combat situations. The room fell silent as Maya's face burned with humiliation. She had endured years of discrimination, but this public mockery was the final straw. That night, she sat in her quarters staring at her commendations and medals, feeling like they meant nothing in a system that would never value her contributions. Maya began researching military regulations and discovered that Colonel Harrison had been systematically violating equal opportunity policies. She documented every instance of discrimination, every blocked transfer, every unfair evaluation. But she knew that filing a complaint would likely end her career. The military's Old Boys Club protected its own, and whistleblowers rarely survived the retaliation. Maya needed a different approach. She decided to prove her worth in a way that couldn't be ignored or dismissed. If the system wouldn't give her a chance to fly fighters, she would create her own opportunity. Over the following months, Maya volunteered for every dangerous mission available. She flew into combat zones, navigated through enemy territory, and performed aerial maneuvers that impressed even the most skeptical pilots. Her reputation as a fearless and skilled aviator spread throughout the base, but Colonel Harrison remained unmoved, continuing to block her advancement while promoting less qualified male pilots. Maya realized that playing by the rules would never work. She needed to take matters into her own hands, and forced the system to recognize her abilities in a way that couldn't be ignored. The opportunity came during a joint training exercise with Navy fighter squadrons. Maya was assigned to transport duty, but she had been secretly studying F-18 flight manuals and practicing combat maneuvers in flight simulators. She knew this might be her only chance to prove that she belonged in a fighter cockpit. As she prepared for what could be the most important mission of her career, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She would show Colonel Harrison and the entire military establishment that she was more than capable of handling whatever they threw at her. Maya's plan was audacious and risky. During the training exercise, she would demonstrate her fighter pilot skills in a way that couldn't be dismissed or covered up. She had been studying the exercise parameters and knew exactly when and where to make her move. The phrase she had etched onto her cargo plane's flaps would soon become legendary among military aviators. It was a message that would resonate with anyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed because of their gender, race, or background. The morning of the exercise dawned clear and bright. Maya performed her pre-flight checks with unusual care, knowing that everything had to be perfect. She had spent weeks preparing for this moment, studying every possible scenario and contingency. Her hands were steady as she climbed into the cockpit, but her heart was racing with anticipation. This was her chance to prove that she was more than just a transport pilot. She was about to show the world what she was truly capable of achieving. As Maya taxied toward the runway, she thought about all the obstacles she had overcome to reach this point. The discrimination, the blocked promotions, the constant doubts about her abilities. Today, she would put all of that behind her and show everyone what she could do. The phrase etched on her flaps would soon become a symbol of determination and courage for aviators everywhere. She was ready to make history, one way or another. The tower cleared her for takeoff, and Maya pushed the throttles forward. Her cargo plane lifted off smoothly, but she knew that this routine transport mission would be anything but routine. She had spent months planning this moment, and now it was time to execute her plan. As she climbed to altitude, Maya could see the Navy F-18s forming up for the training exercise. Soon, they would discover that the quiet transport pilot had more surprises in store than anyone could imagine. Maya's cargo plane approached the designated training area where Navy F-18 Hornets were conducting mock combat exercises. She had studied their flight patterns and knew exactly where they would be positioned. Her heart pounded as she initiated the first phase of her plan. Instead of maintaining straight and level flight like a typical transport pilot, Maya began executing combat maneuvers that would make any fighter pilot proud. Her cargo plane rolled and dove with precision that shouldn't have been possible for such a large aircraft. The Navy pilots initially assumed they were seeing things. Transport planes didn't fly like fighters, and certainly not with the skill Maya was displaying. Lieutenant Commander Jake Thompson, leading the F-18 formation, radioed his squadron to verify what they were witnessing. The cargo plane was performing barrel rolls and defensive maneuvers that would have been impressive even for an experienced fighter pilot. Maya's years of secret training were paying off as she pushed her aircraft to its limits. Colonel Harrison, monitoring the exercise from the command center, watched in disbelief as Maya's transport plane outmaneuvered several F-18s in mock combat scenarios. His face grew red with anger as he realized what was happening. The woman he had dismissed as unfit for fighter duty was making his pilots look like amateurs. He grabbed the radio and screamed orders for Maya to return to base immediately, but she was too far away to hear his commands clearly. Maya continued her demonstration, executing a series of evasive maneuvers that left the Navy pilots scrambling to keep up. She had studied their tactics and knew exactly how to counter their attacks. Her cargo plane danced through the sky with an agility that defied its size and weight. The F-18 pilots found themselves constantly outflanked and outmaneuvered by a woman flying a transport aircraft. It was a humbling experience that would be talked about for years to come. The Navy squadron leader, Lieutenant Commander Thompson, was both impressed and frustrated. His highly trained fighter pilots were being schooled by a cargo plane, and he couldn't understand how it was possible. He decided to take a closer look at this mysterious transport pilot who was making his squadron look incompetent. As he flew closer to Maya's aircraft, he noticed something unusual etched on the cargo plane's flaps. The phrase was simple but powerful: never underestimate a woman's determination. Lieutenant Commander Thompson read it aloud over the radio, and suddenly everything made sense. This wasn't just a transport pilot showing off. This was a statement, a declaration of capability that couldn't be ignored. The Navy pilot found himself smiling despite the embarrassment his squadron was experiencing. Here was someone who had clearly been held back by the system but refused to accept defeat. Maya's radio crackled with communications from the F-18 pilots, but instead of the usual military protocol, she heard something unexpected. Lieutenant Commander Thompson's voice came through clearly. "Transport pilot, your flying is exceptional. Where did you learn to handle an aircraft like that?" For the first time in her career, Maya felt like she was being recognized for her skills rather than dismissed because of her gender. The training exercise had effectively stopped as all the Navy pilots focused on Maya's incredible demonstration. She continued to outfly them at every turn, proving that her skills were not just adequate, but superior to many of the fighter pilots she had been denied the chance to join. Colonel Harrison's attempts to order her back to base were ignored as Maya pressed on with her mission to prove her worth once and for all. As word spread throughout the military communication networks, other pilots began tuning in to witness the spectacle. A cargo plane was dominating a squadron of F-18s, and the pilot was a woman who had been denied the opportunity to fly fighters. The story began to take on legendary proportions as more people learned about Maya's incredible flying display and the message etched on her aircraft. Maya knew she was taking a huge risk with her career, but she also knew this might be her only chance to prove that the discrimination she had faced was not only wrong but counterproductive. The military was missing out on talented pilots simply because of prejudice and outdated thinking. Her demonstration was about more than just her own career. It was about changing the system for all the qualified women who would come after her. The F-18 pilots found themselves in the unprecedented situation of being outflown by a transport aircraft. Maya's maneuvers were textbook perfect, her timing impeccable, and her tactical awareness superior to most of the fighter pilots she was facing. Lieutenant Commander Thompson realized he was witnessing something historic. This wasn't just about aviation skills. It was about breaking down barriers and proving that talent had no gender. Maya's cargo plane continued to dominate the training exercise, executing maneuvers that shouldn't have been possible for such a large aircraft. She was flying with the precision and aggression of a seasoned fighter pilot, despite being assigned to transport duty throughout her career. The Navy pilots found themselves constantly outmaneuvered and outthought by someone the Air Force had deemed unsuitable for fighter operations. Colonel Harrison's face was purple with rage as he watched his discriminatory policies being exposed in the most public way possible. Other senior officers in the command center began questioning how such a talented pilot had been relegated to transport duty. The whispers and sideways glances made it clear that Harrison's leadership decisions were being scrutinized. Maya's demonstration was having exactly the effect she had hoped for. As the exercise continued, Maya's flying became even more impressive. She wasn't just keeping up with the F-18s. She was leading them through complex tactical scenarios that showcased her superior understanding of aerial combat. The Navy pilots found themselves following her lead, learning from someone they had initially dismissed as just another transport pilot. The role reversal was complete and devastating to the old guard's prejudices. Lieutenant Commander Thompson made a decision that would change everything. Instead of ending the exercise, he ordered his pilots to follow Maya's lead and learn from her techniques. It was an unprecedented acknowledgement of her superior skills and a direct challenge to the Air Force's assessment of her capabilities. The Navy was essentially saying that the Air Force had made a terrible mistake in not promoting Maya to fighter status. The radio chatter among the F-18 pilots reflected their growing respect for Maya's abilities. Comments about her being just a transport pilot were replaced with admiration for her tactical brilliance and flying precision. Several pilots openly stated that they had never seen anyone fly a cargo plane with such skill and aggression. Maya had succeeded in changing their perception completely. Maya's demonstration reached its climax as she executed a series of defensive maneuvers that would have been challenging even for the most experienced fighter pilots. Her cargo plane twisted and turned through the sky with a grace that belied its size and weight. The F-18 pilots found themselves unable to get a lock on her aircraft, despite their advanced targeting systems and superior speed. The phrase, "never underestimate a woman's determination," became the topic of intense discussion among the pilots. Lieutenant Commander Thompson realized that Maya's message wasn't just about gender equality. It was about the military's tendency to overlook talent based on preconceived notions and institutional bias. Her demonstration was forcing everyone to confront their assumptions about what different types of pilots could accomplish. Colonel Harrison's attempts to end the exercise were overruled by higher-ranking officers who had heard about the unprecedented display of flying skill. Word had reached the Pentagon, and senior officials wanted to see what all the fuss was about. Maya had succeeded in making her demonstration impossible to ignore or cover up. The military bureaucracy was being forced to confront its own shortcomings. As the exercise entered its final phase, Maya prepared for the most challenging part of her demonstration. She would attempt a series of combat maneuvers that would definitively prove her fighter pilot capabilities. The F-18 pilots watched in amazement as she positioned her cargo plane for what appeared to be an impossible tactical scenario. Everyone held their breath as Maya began her final proof of superiority. Maya's cargo plane dove toward the ocean surface at a steep angle, with two F-18s in pursuit. The Navy pilots assumed they finally had her cornered, but Maya had other plans. At the last possible moment, she pulled up sharply and executed a perfect split-S maneuver that left the pursuing fighters overshooting their target. The crowd in the command center gasped as Maya's transport aircraft climbed steeply, having outmaneuvered two of the Navy's best pilots. The F-18 pilots were speechless. They had just witnessed a cargo plane execute a fighter maneuver that many of them would have struggled to perform. Lieutenant Commander Thompson's voice came over the radio with genuine admiration. "That was absolutely incredible flying. I've never seen anyone handle an aircraft like that." Maya's demonstration had achieved its purpose. She had proven beyond any doubt that she belonged in a fighter cockpit. Colonel Harrison could no longer ignore the evidence before his eyes. The woman he had dismissed as unfit for fighter duty had just outflown an entire squadron of Navy's elite pilots. His discriminatory policies were being exposed in the most public and humiliating way possible. Other officers in the command center were openly questioning his judgment and leadership decisions. The old guard's control was crumbling. Maya's radio crackled with congratulations from the F-18 pilots. For the first time in her career, she was being recognized by her peers as an equal rather than being dismissed because of her gender. The Navy pilots were asking her about her training, her techniques, and her background. They couldn't understand how someone with her skills had been relegated to transport duty. The story of Maya's demonstration began spreading throughout the military community like wildfire. Social media posts and news articles started appearing, describing the cargo pilot who had outflown a squadron of F-18s. The phrase, "never underestimate a woman's determination," became a rallying cry for female service members who had faced similar discrimination. Maya had become a symbol of resistance against institutional bias. As Maya prepared to return to base, she reflected on what she had accomplished. She had proven that the military's assessment of her capabilities was completely wrong. More importantly, she had shown that the system's prejudices were preventing it from utilizing some of its most talented personnel. The demonstration had been about more than just her own career. It was about changing the culture for future generations of female pilots. Lieutenant Commander Thompson made a request that would change everything. He asked his superiors to recommend Maya for an immediate transfer to fighter training. The Navy was essentially offering to take her if the Air Force continued to waste her talents. It was an unprecedented move that would force the Air Force to confront its discriminatory practices or risk losing one of its most skilled pilots. The landing back at base was unlike anything Maya had experienced before. Ground crews and fellow pilots lined the runway to witness her return. Word of her incredible demonstration had spread throughout the base, and everyone wanted to see the transport pilot who had outflown the Navy's best. Maya's cargo plane touched down to thunderous applause from her colleagues. Colonel Harrison was waiting for her at the aircraft, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. But he was no longer in a position of strength. Senior officers from the Pentagon had arrived to investigate how such a talented pilot had been overlooked for so long. Maya's demonstration had triggered a review of the entire pilot assignment process, and Harrison's discriminatory practices were about to be exposed. As Maya climbed down from her cockpit, she was greeted by reporters and military officials who wanted to hear her story. The phrase etched on her flaps had become famous overnight, and she was being hailed as a hero for standing up to institutional discrimination. The quiet transport pilot had become a symbol of courage and determination for service members everywhere. The investigation that followed Maya's demonstration revealed years of systematic discrimination against female pilots. Colonel Harrison's evaluation records showed a clear pattern of bias, with qualified women being passed over for promotions and choice assignments. The evidence was overwhelming, and Harrison's career was effectively over. Maya had not only proven her own worth but had exposed a corrupt system that had been holding back talented personnel. Maya's story became a turning point in military aviation policy. New regulations were implemented to ensure that pilot assignments were based solely on merit and capability. The phrase, "Never underestimate a woman's determination," was adopted as an unofficial motto by female service members who had faced similar challenges. Maya had succeeded in changing the system from within. The Navy followed through on Lieutenant Commander Thompson's recommendation and offered Maya an immediate transfer to their F-18 program. But the Air Force, facing public embarrassment and Pentagon scrutiny, finally offered her the fighter pilot position she had been seeking for years. Maya had the choice she had always wanted, and she chose to stay with the Air Force to help implement the reforms her demonstration had triggered. Maya's first day in F-18 training was a media event. Reporters and photographers documented her transition from transport pilot to fighter pilot, using her story as an example of how institutional barriers could be overcome through determination and skill. The woman who had been told she was too emotional for combat flying was now being celebrated as one of the military's most promising fighter pilots. The training program that had seemed impossible to access was now welcoming Maya with open arms. Her instructors, many of whom had witnessed her demonstration against the Navy F-18s, treated her with the respect she had always deserved. She excelled in every aspect of training, proving that her skills were not just adequate but exceptional. Maya was finally where she belonged. Colonel Harrison's downfall was swift and complete. A military tribunal found him guilty of discrimination and abuse of authority. He was stripped of his rank and discharged from the service in disgrace. Maya's courage in standing up to his corrupt leadership had not only advanced her own career, but had ended his ability to harm other service members. Justice had been served. The phrase, "never underestimate a woman's determination," became more than just words etched on an aircraft. It became a movement within the military, inspiring other discriminated service members to stand up for their rights. Maya received letters from women around the world who had been inspired by her story to pursue their own dreams despite facing similar obstacles. Maya's graduation from F-18 training was attended by senior military officials, including the Secretary of Defense. In his speech, he praised her courage and determination while acknowledging that the military had failed to recognize her talents earlier. Maya's story had become a case study in how institutional bias could be overcome through individual courage and determination. The media coverage of Maya's journey from transport pilot to fighter pilot inspired a new generation of women to pursue military aviation careers. Applications from qualified female candidates increased dramatically, and the military found itself with a larger pool of talented pilots than ever before. Maya's demonstration had not only changed her own life, but had opened doors for countless others. As Maya prepared for her first combat mission as an F-18 pilot, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The years of discrimination and frustration had been difficult, but they had also made her stronger and more determined. She had proven that barriers could be broken and that talent would eventually be recognized, regardless of gender or background. The F-18 squadron that Maya joined was composed of pilots who had heard about her legendary demonstration. They welcomed her not as a novelty or a token female pilot, but as a skilled aviator who had proven her worth in the most dramatic way possible. Maya had earned their respect through her actions, not through quotas or special treatment. Maya's first combat mission was a success, with her demonstrating the same skill and precision that had made her famous during the training exercise. Her squadron mates noted her calm under pressure and her tactical brilliance. The woman who had been deemed unfit for fighter duty was now being recognized as one of the squadron's most valuable pilots. The changes that Maya's demonstration had triggered continued to ripple through the military. New policies were implemented to prevent discrimination, and a new generation of female pilots began advancing through the ranks. Maya's courage had not only changed her own life, but had transformed the entire culture of military aviation. Years later, Maya would be promoted to squadron commander, leading the same type of unit that had once been closed to her. The phrase, "Never underestimate a woman's determination," was painted on her office wall, serving as a daily reminder of the barriers she had overcome and the changes she had helped bring about. Her story continued to inspire new generations of aviators who refused to accept limitations placed on them by others. The training exercise that had changed everything became legendary in military aviation circles. It was studied in academies and used as an example of how individual courage could challenge institutional bias. Maya's demonstration had proven that the military's strength came from utilizing all available talent, regardless of gender or background. Maya's legacy extended far beyond her own career success. The systemic changes her demonstration had triggered resulted in a more diverse and capable military aviation force. The barriers that had once seemed insurmountable had been broken down, creating opportunities for future generations of qualified pilots who might otherwise have been overlooked. The phrase etched on Maya's cargo plane flaps had become a symbol of resistance against discrimination and a call to action for anyone who had been underestimated. It reminded everyone that determination and skill could overcome even the most entrenched prejudices. Maya's story had become proof that one person's courage could change an entire system. As Maya looked back on her career, she realized that the discrimination she had faced had ultimately made her stronger and more determined. The obstacles that had seemed so insurmountable had actually prepared her for greater challenges and achievements. Her journey from transport pilot to fighter pilot had become an inspiration to anyone who had ever been told they weren't good enough or didn't belong. The military was forever changed by Maya's demonstration. The old guard's prejudices had been exposed and eliminated, replaced by a system that valued merit over bias. Maya's courage had not only advanced her own career, but had created a more just and effective military for everyone. The woman who had been underestimated had ultimately transformed the entire institution. Maya's story became a testament to the power of individual determination in the face of systemic discrimination. Her willingness to risk everything for the chance to prove her worth had not only changed her own life, but had opened doors for countless others. The phrase, "never underestimate a woman's determination," had become more than just words on an aircraft. It had become a rallying cry for anyone who refused to accept limitations placed on them by others. The F-18s that had once charged toward her transport plane in a training exercise had become symbols of the barriers she had overcome. Maya's demonstration had proven that talent and determination could triumph over prejudice and institutional bias. Her legacy would continue to inspire future generations of aviators who refuse to be limited by the narrow thinking of others. Maya Rodriguez had started as a transport pilot who was told she didn't belong in a fighter cockpit. Through courage, skill, and determination, she had not only proven her worth, but had changed the entire military aviation system. The phrase etched on her flaps had become a symbol of hope for anyone who had ever been underestimated. Maya's story was proof that barriers could be broken and that talent would eventually be recognized, regardless of gender or background.